Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. In Ottawa, a couple thousand people came together on Parliament Hill to mark the third National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, a day to honor residential school survivors and the ones who didn't make it home. Here's Annette Francis with that story.
The Remembering the Children ceremony began with the Eagle River Singers Honor Song and an opening prayer with Claudette Commanda.
Without love, there's no healing. And what each and every one of our survivors pray for as we say this prayer from our heart today, let us show that love to the survivors.
It was a somber event, a time to show support, reflect, and entertain. Survivor Eddie Cote performed his residential school song. Onlookers sat and stood on the grounds. It was a sea of orange shirts and orange flags, and a few orange hearts as well. Richie Allen created them specifically for this event. She works at the Library and Archives of Canada.
I'd done work in these records, and I just knew I had to say something and do something. So part of doing something was making these hearts. I made a number of these hearts, and painted. Once they started having the National Day, I painted a couple orange to bring out the little ones for the little ones that didn't come back and we've yet to locate. And the big ones, is for everybody.
Nancy Peel is a residential school survivor from Fort McMurray, Alberta. She says today is important so Canadians can understand the trauma of residential schools and its ongoing legacy. Peel says more than recognition is needed for survivors.
I think that it's not to throw money at them. It's to come up with some innovative healing programs that will walk people through the trauma and the damage that's been done.
An emotional and visual impact of the event was the procession of the ceremonial red cloth. It bears the names of over 4,000 children who died while attending residential schools. Quanah Travis helped to carry it through the crowd and to the stage.
It's covered in people who went and didn't come home. And the fact that for even 10 minutes of my life I was able to carry them to a place where they could be honored was probably one of the proudest moments of my life.
With the day coming to an end, most here agree healing and reconciliation will continue into the future. Annette Francis, APTN National News, Ottawa.
Well, as you can see, there was a lot happening in Ottawa and right across Canada this afternoon. Here's a look at some of the events from Parliament Hill today.
This September 30th, 2023 marks the third National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. I applaud all First Nations people across Turtle Island who continue to be resilient, courageous, and prosperous. So miigwech. Canada is taking some strides towards reconciliation. I'll admit that. But I challenge this country to do better. And I extend this challenge to all Canadians who know that they could do better. Let's never forget these important facts. Number one, First Nations people helped build this country dating back to the fur trade. Fact number two, we fought in many wars alongside you, and they were won because of our help.
We thank the Creator for all of His blessings. We come together, brothers and sisters, to raise our voice with love and kindness to say a prayer, our prayer of love to all the survivors who are here with us, to all those survivors who did not return home, and to all the children. Remembering the children.
I also want to honor the survivors for your resilience, your courage, and your strength. You are thrivers. The challenge now is, what do we do to have good relations? What do we do to restore respectful relationships? How do we advance true reconciliation?
We honor and we remember all those who are now our ancestors, watching over us in the spirit world. We are here because you survived genocide. We honor and remember the children who died in the Indian residential school institutions.
The National Day for Truth and Reconciliation is a day to honor all Indigenous survivors who are with us and those children who died in those institutions. We must respect all survivors, amplify their voice, and call out the deniers. We must challenge the people who don't want to face the truth. The residential school system was intended to destroy First Nations, Inuit, and Métis cultures and our languages, but they did not succeed. For those that never made it home, their spirits call out to us to be remembered and to be honored. We have a powerful symbol of those truths. The National Student Memorial Register carries the names of 4,140 names of children identified through the records in the NCTR's care and the statements of their families. Our research is ongoing. We still don't have all the records. The NCTR continues to work with churches, governments, and others so we can finally access the 23 million records that were not released to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. We know more children will be found and their names will be added.
On February 29th, 1880, a letter from Bishop Grandin was addressed to the Canadian government. Bishop wrote, "If you bring us 100 Indians and half-breeds to the mission, where they leave our convent, they would no longer be Indians. They would become good citizens, earn a good living, and be useful to their country." And so it began, as across Canada, from coast to coast, as children were taken from their families. The opening of the residential school started the most tragic, destructive, and separation of the Native people and loss of our values and culture. We were witness to the darkest time in Canada's history.
I had so many emotions going through me when I was watching the memorial cloth banner. It's a visual impact of how many kids actually didn't come back home. So, what stories do we want to tell our children? This is, of course, the history of Canada, as told for the longest time, of explorers and discoveries, of taming a wild land, of settlements and confederation. But as time has passed, Canadians have come to realize that this version of history is not complete. Canada's history is so much more than that. It should reflect Indigenous histories. Certainly, our national history needs to reflect the challenges, trauma, joys, experiences, knowledge, and culture of Indigenous peoples and lives.
In Winnipeg, Wausau Healing Centre organized a healing walk. The day started with a pipe ceremony and gathering at Odina Circle at the Forks at a monument to murdered and missing Indigenous people. APTN's Leanne Sanders was there.
They came by the thousands, wearing their orange shirts, ribbon skirts, and even powwow regalia, walking to honor, remember, and heal from the residential schools and their legacy. The memories are still raw for Michelle Standing Ready, a survivor of the LeBret and Maryvale schools in Saskatchewan.
It's been about 5 years, in and out, one residential school to another. Yeah.
Why is it important to be here today?
Because a lot of our friends went missing, unaccounted for. And for my kids too, eh?
Non-Indigenous people walked alongside. For Richard Kelly, who's taking an Indigenous Studies course, the story of a classmate from Long Plain had an impact on him.
6 years old, he was taken away from his family and moved to the Indian Residential School in Brandon, which meant he could have no more contact. Even though there was a school there, he got sent to the one in Brandon just to make sure the contact was lost.
Jazz LaValle was moved to start a walk in 2021 when Kamloops Indian Band announced 215 potential unmarked graves were found at the residential school there. She's now undertaken a 4-directional walk.
And people will just stop and hand me their moccasins and ask me to carry them. So this bag actually went from about 15 to about 50 pounds today. Everything you see on it is gifted from a survivor of some sort.
The walk today wound through downtown Winnipeg, ending at Canada Life Centre for a concert by Seaweed Band, and where young and old gathered for a powwow. And this little one, who was just happy to be seen, as so many Indigenous children never had a chance to be. Leanne Sanders, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
So cute. To Nova Scotia now, where hundreds of people gathered in ceremony for the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. Angel Moore was at the event, which happened on the former Shubenacadie residential school.
Up this hill is where the Shubenacadie residential school once stood. It was operated by the Catholic Church from 1930 to 1967, where thousands of Mi'kmaq and Wolastoqey children were forced to attend. Behind me is a heart filled with orange flags, a symbol of healing. Earlier today, hundreds of people gathered to remember those who did not come home. Debbie Paul is from the Shubenacadie Nation and is a survivor. She shared her story with the crowd and says the Catholic Church needs to release all records relating to the school.
And then, now it's time to lay our cards down on the table and say, government, charitable organizations, it's time for you to come with your documents. We've asked for them, you will not give them to us. We've asked, our leaders have asked, you've never given them to us. And what you do give us, it doesn't even relate for the stories that our survivors have told.
The event was organized by the Shubenacadie Mi'kmaq Nation. Community members gave out orange t-shirts for a day of learning and sharing traditional and cultural knowledge. Tim Bernard of the Millbrook Mi'kmaq Nation is the Executive Director for the Mi'kmaq-Debert Cultural Centre. He is working with the Shubenacadie Nation and survivors to develop a research plan for possible graves.
There's still other areas to be looked at, but they want to confirm with survivors and descendants that, stories of what we're hearing through our engagement sessions, that these are areas that we need to truth out.
The Orange Heart will remain for a few more days. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Shanaki, Nova Scotia.
The National Day for Truth and Reconciliation is especially poignant in the Yukon this year. Earlier this week, officials announced 15 potential unmarked graves were located at a former residential school site. Our reporter Sarah Connors tells us how the territory is grappling with the recent discoveries while also seeking to move forward in a good way.
Hundreds gathered in downtown Whitehorse today to remember the children who never made it home. The crowd marched to the Kwanlin Dun Cultural Center, where a ceremony took place to honor survivors and their families.
The tobacco is for calling our people home and to protect our people.
The Carcross Tagish First Nation was presented with tobacco and cloth by the Yukon Residential School and Missing Children Project Vice Chair Doris Bill. Earlier this week, the project announced 15 potential graves were located at the former Chutla school site in Carcross. Deputy Hasha Duhen Darla Jean Lindstorm says the discoveries have validated what her community has known all along.
It's not a surprise, it's a confirmation that we knew what was out there.
Lindstorm says it's now time for the territory to heal from the traumas of the past.
So we must move on in a sacred, honorable way and, pray for each other, hold each other up and hold the survivors up. I mean, because it isn't an easy journey.
Sarah Connors, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
In Saskatoon, led by residential school survivors, a huge crowd walked to commemorate the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. The Rock Your Roots Walk has been happening for the past 7 years. Over 100 local groups have been organizing the walk and other events since the TRC calls to action were announced. Thousands of people walked to Reconciliation Circle in Victoria Park to listen to speakers tell their stories and let the children of today participate in activities just for them. Shirley Isbister is one of the organizers. She says the walk is impressive to see and take part in.
The last one, we had over 4,000 people walking. It was amazing to turn around and just see a sea of orange. And what we encourage and what a lot of the cultural people do is they wear their regalia, they'll carry signs, they participate. So it's rocking your roots no matter what culture you come from. And at the same time, honoring our residential school survivors.
To the north now, where Nunavut's leadership gathered in the territory's capital to commemorate and remember Inuit who attended Canadian residential schools. As rain poured outside, well over 200 people attended the National Truth and Reconciliation Day ceremonies in Iqaluit. Representatives from Nunavut Tungavik Incorporated and other Inuit organizations gathered to honor the survivors and victims of residential schools. There were 13 schools in what became the territory of Nunavut, with the last one, Kivalliq Hall in Rankin Inlet, closing in 1997.
I just want to say that this is something that we want to do as Inuit, is to reconcile what we've seen, what has gone through for the last 40 years, 50 years. So this is something that really matters for us. Like it says, every child matters, so every person matters in our case.
Time for a quick break, but there is much more to come on this special one-hour edition of APTN National News, including a special panel from Vancouver.
We lean into the land to help us make it through these times when they're this troubling.
Welcome back to our special one-hour APTN National newscast on this National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. We're going to go to British Columbia, where the Stolo Nation recently announced 158 confirmed deaths of children that attended 3 residential schools and 1 hospital within their territory. They also announced that anomalies suspected to be unmarked graves were also found, but have yet to release that number because it's early in the investigation. APTN video journalist Tina House was joined by 2 guests to talk further about this discovery and about some of the challenges for Indigenous nations in seeking the truth. And a warning, some of the details here may be hard to hear.
Tansei. I'm Tina House. We're here on the former property that was once known as St. Mary's Indian Residential School just outside of Mission, BC. Joining me today on my panel is Mike Kelly, a former student, as well as Lorraine Smith, who now works for the First Nations Health Authority. Mike, I want to begin with you. Earlier today, they revealed some very troubling results of their ground-penetrating radar and all of their archaeology research that they've done here. How are you feeling right now, Mike? Because I know myself, I'm feeling very disturbed and very troubled by the news that there are unmarked anomalies here on this property right now.
Oh, when they first brought it out this morning, I was really re-traumatized from death that I know of in the old school there. And thanks to Lorraine here, she helped me walk me through that traumatic time.
Do you feel lucky that you made it out alive, knowing that so many others didn't?
Looking back at my life, I don't believe luck has anything to do with it. It's because I changed my life when I was in my 20s and started working for a creator, and I find myself burying all my family and friends that I grew up with, went to school with. All my teachers are gone from this faith, and I believe that I'm here because Creator God wants me here yet.
Mike, you're also now a healer as well. Tell us about some of the work that you do to help others that are dealing with trauma.
I use the way I learned is hands-on healing. I pray with ones that have trauma, grief and loss, burdens and everything, and any messages, I'll relay them, or at least when no messages, I could feel the pain coming off of them and them letting go of the pains that they're carrying.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your experience when you went to school here? How old were you and what was that first day like? Do you remember that day?
I was 9 years old when I went to school at the old school over there in 1956. And first off, the first year was really puzzling because it's all new and had to learn everything, learn the rules, go by the rules, get the strap, whatever. We got strapped for stepping out of line, talking when we're not supposed to be talking in church. The nuns had a yardstick, that kind of stuff. And it's all learning what to do and how to do things according to the rules.
So very militarized, in your opinion, is how you would summarize your experience at residential school?
After a while, when I was going through court, I told the people that those people in concentration camps over on the other side of the world had it better than we do because we weren't allowed to speak unless spoken to or ask a question. We become docile. When I was in court there, and I told the courts, I said, we became docile because we couldn't do anything, say anything, move, or step out of line there or get the strap. So we learned how to listen and shut up.
That just breaks my heart, Mike, because you were just a child. Going back to some of the information that was shared with us today, it was very troubling to hear about when this old school burnt down, that the firemen came and actually found fetuses in the walls of that school. That just shook me to my core. I mean, this is horrific information that was shared publicly. Knowing that 158 children died at just these 4 locations, that only just 2% of the St. Mary's former school here was searched so far, and already they've uncovered anomalies. Lorraine, you work extensively in this field now. You work with a number of organizations. Tell me what some of the work that you do.
I am very much involved with 10 Indian residential school projects across BC. One of the largest is the Indian Residential School Survivors Society, and then the second largest is Southern Laleham Healing Society. And we are health and cultural supports to 210 plus First Nations across BC, as well as we have missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls programs throughout the 5 FNHA regions, as well as Indian Day School. Lately, we've rolled out funding to help with the trauma, the ongoing trauma that folks have been dealing with in community. And last but not least is we support the 18 IRS sites and the 3 Indian hospital site communities with the work that they're doing, which brings us here today.
Obviously, you see a parallel between residential school and now murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls across this country. Lorraine, what are some of the challenges for you to continue to do the work to support the projects and the many amazing people in the front lines trying to help people in their trauma?
I would have to say that the challenge is since the Aboriginal Healing Foundation was no longer in existence, they did a transfer of funding over to, in our case in BC, First Nations Health Authority. That funding base has not changed ever. And there is no way that 10 organizations can meet the needs of 210 plus communities. And just really, we're statistically noticing a real spike, especially since the 215 and to Kamloops, a real spike in needs for communities. They're dealing with grief, they're dealing with loss, they're dealing with the opioid crisis, and this 215 issue and the missing children is just tugging away at all our hearts. And finding the resources to adequately address that is very hard to do on a funding parameter that only goes year to year. We need long-term sustainable funding.
Absolutely, and I think certainly hearing information that there's even more suspected unmarked graves being uncovered here just outside of Mission, BC, it's triggering for many. Mike, can you tell me about when you were a young man? I know you shared with me earlier that you actually ran away 26 times while you were a student here. Share with us an experience that you remember of you running away.
Well, when I was 10 years old, me and my stepbrother, my brother wanted to go home. I said, "Why, you want to go home now?" And he said, "Yeah." And then our next door neighbor, he was 6 years old and first year of school here in 1957. So I said, "Okay, we're going to go after dark." And we took off. And it took us 3 days to get from here to Hope. And I tell that story every once in a while, that we were running away from a car one time and there was just a little drain ditch. We were crawling inside the pipe there. We don't know if that guy saw us or not, but nothing happened. We made it home anyway.
Wow.
We ate apples and pears and whatever we could on the fields, on our journey, and that's what kept us moving.
Incredible. What a story. Mike, thank you so much for sharing that with us. I think that it really shows the resiliency and the survivor and the power of many of our people that endured this horrific experience. Lorraine, this is obviously very difficult for so many people to hear the information that was shared here in Stolo territory. What can people do to find their help and their healing in this very difficult time?
I know that there are a lot of numbers that people can call. There's crisis lines with the Indian Residential School Survivors. There's crisis lines with Southern Laleham. They can contact the First Nations Health Authority for a list of resources. And really, at the end of the day, I heard Mike say earlier that we lean on the Creator the grandfathers, the grandmothers, the ancestors. We lean into the land to help us make it through these times when they're this troubling and really touch our hearts. So I really believe in the power of the creation that's all around us and the life that's all around us.
Indeed. Mike, any final words on that time that you went to school here that you could leave us with?
Education was good, but the rest of it wasn't. I liked playing soccer and basketball and baseball here, and when I left, I run far away as I could, and I went to California, and then I wound up going to school down there and I got my GED and a bunch of other engine overhaul degrees and stuff like that when I went back to school in California.
How are you feeling, Mike, hearing that these were unmarked graves, potentially graves of your schoolmates here on these grounds where you literally played soccer?
I didn't hear about it till after I grew up and after I was already in my healing journey. So it was something, through our lives, we always knew that they were there, and there was always children that went to school and didn't come home, And that was a big eye-opener when I walked into that 215 in Kamloops there. So I stayed there and I supported them for a couple of days before I came home.
Yeah. Mike, thank you so much for sharing with us. Thank you so much for joining us. Lorraine, thank you so much for joining us as well. This is very, very impactful information that you've shared with us, and we really do appreciate it. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us today, and back to you in studio.
Thanks, Tina, Mike, and Lorraine. A reminder, the National Indian Residential School Crisis Line once again is available for survivors and others who might need support. That number is 1-866-925-4419. More than 5 million records pertaining to residential schools across Canada are held in the archives at the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation. Still, there are many more records held within different institutions across the globe. Sav Jones has sat down with the head of the archives to learn what might be missing and how gathering these vital documents is going.
I'm here at the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation, and with me is the head of the archives, Raymond Frogner. Thanks so much for joining me today, Raymond.
My pleasure.
My first question is, what are the archives documents on residential schools used for, and how do they help survivors?
Well, the documents were actually collected by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission after the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement was struck between federal government and federal and provincial governments, different church organizations, as well as Indigenous representation, to understand the history and legacy of the residential school experience. So these records now exist for survivors, their families, communities, as well as researchers to consult, interrogate the nature of oppression, the way that the system of residential schools operated, the impact it had on communities, and how it actually had an impact on the very nature of the identity of Canadian society.
It's been said that the Vatican has over 1,000 items of residential school documents, and the NCTR has been trying to retrieve them. What kind of information may be in those documents, and what does it say that they are still being held onto a year after the apology?
There is approximately, I would say, 1,000 photographs held at the Oblate Records Center, which is a Catholic order that has an archive in Rome. And those photographs still remain with the Oblate Order's archive in Rome. My recommendation was to scan them and actually return the originals to their home communities, because from what I could tell, the photos themselves were not really being used in the Oblate Order archives. Even if we got digital copies, it could be a first step towards communities going through those photos and recognizing the names of children in the photos, which at this point, none of the photos are described, so that could be a tremendous benefit. For the Vatican archives, I do think there is a large number of materials that missionaries, priests, other Catholic representatives have collected over time, from ceremonies, from gifts, from other occasions, and they've basically been returned to the Vatican for storage. I don't know how often they've ever been actually made, put into public display. Those also could be returned to home communities, I think, if the church wanted to promote the concept of reconciliation with the communities that they had worked with in those schools.
And earlier this year, Manitoba agreed to provide greater access to the death certificates of children at residential schools. How is that going, and have they been provided?
They did, and the way the negotiations occurred, we provided the Manitoba Vital Stats with a list of names that we could identify of children from Manitoba residential schools. And they used that list to identify within their Vital Stats databases those documents they held that documented the lives of those children and the deaths of those children. We also put into that agreement that this is an ongoing annual review, so that as our research continues to go forward and we find more names of children that have passed away at schools in Manitoba, we will submit those to Manitoba Vital Stats, and we fully expect to continue to receive more records from them.
And are there any other provinces who are cooperating with providing residential school documents, or any that refuse?
No one's ever refused, I would say. Some of the discussions have been very long and protracted. For example, Saskatchewan has never produced the records of Vital Stats with us, and neither has Quebec, but we've been in positive discussions with both of those jurisdictions.
And what more needs to be done by the Canadian government to ensure survivors have access to their historical documents of residential schools?
At the moment, we are working, quite recently, the federal government struck a committee called the Document Acquisition Committee, and the goal of that committee was to do another full and comprehensive review of the various ministries' records to find any records that document the history and legacy of residential schools. So this includes, Health, Indian Affairs, Library and Archives Canada, National Film Board, all of the federal government institutions that might have records of those schools. So to date, it's been estimated that there'll probably be about 23 million more records coming to us from the federal government based on that project. They're currently being digitized, collated and brought to CIRNAC, Crown Indigenous Relations, and from Crown Indigenous Relations they'll be sent to us. But that would be the biggest contribution that, in terms of purely records.
Well, we'll have to end it there, Raymond, but thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Time for one more quick break, but there is much more still to come on this special 1-hour edition of the APTN National News on this National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, including a special ceremony held in Calgary.
I hope that the message that I will preach can help us all to reflect upon the role that we each individually need to play in pursuing reconciliation.
Welcome back to this special 1-hour APTN National newscast on the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. Kimberly Murray is the special interlocutor on missing children and unmarked burials, and she wants to see more action from the government to advance reconciliation. Amelia Fournier has more.
Part of my position is to speak with Indigenous communities and survivors of Indian residential schools.
Kimberly Murray, the special interlocutor on missing children and unmarked burials, says that reconciliation is happening on a smaller scale.
Reconciliation is happening more on the ground in small communities with their local governments, their local municipalities, with their neighbors, where it's not happening at the level it needs to happen with the federal government or the provincial governments. So the closer you are to the First Nation, in some cases the reconciliation has been better.
When it comes to larger issues, as she detailed in her interim report, a lot of work has yet to be done. Murray says an oversight body should be established to make sure the recommendations from Indigenous advisors are being respected, like ensuring public awareness of residential schools.
During the Truth and Reconciliation process, many of the provinces and territories started to implement curriculum on Indian residential schools. And then we see changes in government. And then we saw the curriculum being pulled back. And now we see a rise in denialism.
Outlets like the New York Post and right-wing website True North News have published articles denying the experiences of residential school survivors, while many others have taken to social media.
Studies have shown, academics have said, the last step of genocide is to deny it happened. And our government, by changing curriculum and canceling curriculum, is feeding into that last step of genocide.
Murray also says that many records and archives remain under wraps.
When I talk about churches and government need to step up and address the denialism, they hold the evidence. We know it exists. They need to step up.
Murray's mandate is set to end in June 2024, and she hopes her work continues beyond that date. Emilia Fournier, APTN National News, Montreal.
The special service was held this morning in Calgary's St. Mary's Cathedral by Father Cristino Bouvet. He's Cree and Métis and helped prepare the locations for last year's papal visit across Canada. APTN's Chris Stewart spoke to him before the service.
Father Cristino Bouvet was instrumental in ensuring each location of Pope Francis's visit last year was ready for his arrival. The Catholic priest says he knows the pains of residential schools. His grandmother, Okukamin Cree, spent all 12 years of her education in one. He says that the Pope's visit is still a painful subject to many.
I know that the reaction of Indigenous people to his visit was varied, as one would expect. I had no false pretenses going into it that this was going to be the best and most positive experience for everyone in the country, but I did know that there would be some for whom it mattered more than we could understand, especially among our elders, who by their own free choice have decided to retain and continue to practice their Catholic faith.
He says his service on this day will be about bridging our differences.
I hope that the message that I will preach can help us all to reflect upon the role that we each individually need to play in pursuing reconciliation, knowing the gift that it can be for us to reach out to one another, but on this day in particular, to think of reaching out to our Indigenous brothers and sisters in friendship, because I really believe that it is friendship that is going to help to heal the wounds that continue to persist to this day.
Father Bouvet spoke to an intimate congregation of about 80 on this rainy morning.
And on this day, our prayer is that whether we are Indigenous or non-Indigenous, whether we are recently arrived to Canada or have had family here for many generations, whether we have any legacy of the experience of residential school in our family or not, that we would never see ourselves beyond the need to be the agents of truth and reconciliation.
Chris Stewart, APTN National News, Calgary.
The National Day of Truth and Reconciliation hits especially hard for one Yukon artist. Sarah Connor shows us how art has helped carry the survivor through their healing journey.
Went through a lot of hardship, like a lot of violence in that school.
Mary Caesar always knew she'd survive residential school so she could one day tell her story. The Cascadena artist attended Lower Post Residential School in northern British Columbia from ages 4 to 8. Now an elder, her experience there has never been forgotten and is remembered through her paintings.
It was 4 years of just terror and violence and abuse. So I'm still healing from the memories of the abuse I went through there.
While a student at Lower Post, Caesar suffered horrific physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. She can still recall how one nun in particular took special pleasure in terrorizing her. It's a trauma she grapples with through her painting.
She used to punch us in the face, punch us in the head, on her ears.
Caesar says the wounds from residential school devastated her life and she turned to alcohol to cope. After getting sober in 1991, she traveled to Vancouver where she earned a fine arts diploma. It was around that time she knew she had to tell her story.
I believe that it's part of Canada's history and it should never be forgotten. And that experience, it affected my life.
Caesar has also reconnected to her Casca culture, a subject matter she often depicts in her art. Since becoming a serious artist, her paintings have been showcased across Canada and Europe. She says it's important to share her story with those who are unfamiliar with Canada's past.
I believe in Europe and in the world to know our history here in Canada, what we suffered.
Caesar wants to continue on her healing journey through her art, even if that journey is painful.
It's called 215. This painting is about when they found us 215 unmarked graves.
It's why she's chosen to paint the former Kamloops Indian Residential School.
It's just devastating and it's emotional for me as a survivor.
While healing hasn't been easy, Caesar says art helps with the process.
It's part of my healing. I've been on this healing journey for a long time.
Sarah Connors, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
Thousands of football fans and residential school survivors all gathered at BC Place in Vancouver in a special tribute in recognition of National Truth and Reconciliation Day. APTN's Tina House was there and has more.
It's a sea of orange as the BC Lions honor residential school survivors in a home game against the Saskatchewan Roughriders. Jamie Terrace is with the BC Lions. He says this tribute was started after the discovery of the 215 suspected unmarked graves into Kamloops to Sequepum.
We reached out to Phyllis Webstead and the Orange Shirt Society, and then that started everything. And here we are 3 years later. So we're really, really honored to be doing this and honored to host all of our Indigenous guests.
The BC Lions Football Club once again commissioned this custom-designed logo from artist Corinne Hunt. And this year, they incorporated a Squamish word and Hulkamalum word, both meaning mountain lion, to represent the team. He says the club is honored to host this evening and join others in reconciliation.
It's in the words truth and reconciliation. One is opening our ears and being willing to close our mouths maybe and to listen, right? Just to listen to the truth and be open to that. And then secondly, look at how we can re-engage with the Indigenous community, how we can reach out, how we can develop relationships. That's what it's all about moving into the future. So I think both those parts are really important.
And the fans were treated to a special performance by Hallucination at halftime. Viola Thomas is a residential school survivor that attended the Kamloops Indian Residential School for 5 years.
It's important that professional sports have that opportunity to lift up the truth in a good way.
She says she still feels traumatized over her experience, but tonight, Viola is able to enjoy herself and cheer on her favorite team as they score a touchdown. And the BC Lions won the game. Tina House, APTN National News, Vancouver.
One excited fan. Well, that is all the time we have for this special 1 hour APTN National newscast marking this National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. And what a day it's been. You can catch up on anything you missed today by visiting our website, aptnnews.ca, or by visiting our APTN News YouTube channel. Stay tuned to APTN for special programming over the next 2 days here to mark National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. Special programming including movies and everything you can imagine. I'm Dennis Ward. Marcy Miigwech, thanks for being with us all day long here. Have a great night.
your spirit is here in our sound. And to you I call, oh, catch us as we fall.
Toi tu n'appartiens à personne, sinon à la plaine, au ciel, au bois. Tu viens des gens libres, toi tu limites. Oh non, 2 ans sans le sou, sans la terre.